Okay, just on page 1, I'll read that bottom line. A life of blessing, a life of victory, a life of conquest is offered by God and is taken by them. In those first 18 verses, God offers them victory and blessing, and they take it. It's wonderful. I mean, those first verses are just kind of like you wish the book would have stopped there. I mean, they triumphantly go forward. What happens when you forsake godly obedience? Well, that next paragraph says, it reaps a life of defeats. That's more than one. Bondage. Because the Bible says, for of whom a man is overcome, of that he comes into bondage. The Lord said in John chapter 8, I am come to destroy the bondage. Whoever serves sins is the slave of sin. And Christ said, I came to set you free. The Son, therefore, if he sets you free, you're free indeed. But if we're not ever set free from sin, we're in bondage to sin. And those Pharisees, they says, hey, we've never served anybody. They were serving sin right then. The Lord said, as literal as the shackles of servitude to some foreign king are the shackles of sin. Now, their servitude, their captivity, their bondage and defeats were all because of disobedience. We may ask, how and why did they forsake godly obedience? What also can we learn from their steps down? And here are their steps down. The first one is they tolerated the enemies of God. That's the first thing they did. And you might want to look at chapter 1, verse 19, because I want to show you right in the text what I'm talking about. Because the first step down, the first step toward captivity and defeat and destruction was tolerating sin. It says in verse 19, and the Lord was with Judah, and they drove out the mountaineers, but they could not drive out the inhabitants of the lowland because they had chariots of iron. Now, that's not true. They could have. What it's saying is they were afraid of them. And they didn't go head to head. They didn't wipe them out. They didn't fight the charioteers. They just took the easy ones. Isn't it true in our life? I mean, often we'll go head to head on something that's easy. You know, we say, well, in fact, I'll tell you, I'm going to stop going to Las Vegas every weekend. I mean, that's really noble. I mean, I've never been to Las Vegas on the weekend. You know what I mean? That's an easy one. I quit that. But if we talk about it, I'm not going to backbite or gossip or get impatient. Now, wait a minute. Now you're meddling, right? Because those are the chariots. And see, all of us have chariots, and we avoid them. They did not drive out the enemies of God. They tolerated God's enemies. Now, as a little test in your life, think about it. Do you tolerate in your life the enemies of God? It doesn't matter if they're your enemies or not. Are they God's enemies? We belong to Him. He indwells us. The Bible says in Ephesians, He's supposed to be at home in our lives. Verse 21 of the same chapter. But the children of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites who inhabited Jerusalem. You know anything about Jerusalem? It's 2,500 feet rising up from the valley. It's just on a big plateau there. It just sticks up. That's why in the Bible it always says go up to Jerusalem, because everywhere is up spiritually and almost geographically. Everything is uphill to Jerusalem. And they said, it's too hard to do that. They're up on the hill. We'll just let them live up there. We don't need that little piece of land. It was only a few acres. So they left, verse 21, the Jebusites who inhabited Jerusalem. So the Jebusites dwell with the children of Benjamin in Jerusalem to this day. Now, this is how we know when the book was written. Because David sent Joab up the water channel, and Joab destroyed the inhabitants of this city and took Jerusalem for David. And it says, till this day. So we know this book was written before David's time. So that's one of those internal clues for knowing when the book was written, because it doesn't usually have a date in it. I just threw that in for free. Look at verse 27. However, Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Beth-shan, and that's a tremendous city. It's being excavated today. It's the largest excavation in all of Israel. It's a phenomenal look at the ancient world as they're uncovering each layer. And the villages around it, and Tanakh and its villages, and the inhabitants of Dor and its villages, or the inhabitants of Ibleam and its villages, or the inhabitants of Megiddo and its villages, for the Canaanites were determined to dwell in that land. And God was determined that they weren't going to dwell in that land. And guess who won? The Canaanites did. Because God's people did not agree with God. All they had to do is say, we agree with you, God. You don't want the people in Megiddo? We'll get them out of Megiddo. And you know what? God would send down hailstones. He would swallow. I mean, anything that it took, He would have done it if He would have found people willing. But He didn't find willing people. They compromised. What they said is, it's too hard to get rid of those Canaanites. So what we'll do is, we'll get rid of the easy Canaanites and we'll leave the hard Canaanites. That's called compromise. Listen to this. I wrote this in my notes. Wouldn't that be like Christians today holding on to some of the vices of their old life? How about holding on to their cigarettes? They say, I can quit anytime I want. They can't. They're addicted to them. They're in chariots of iron. How about their alcohol? I can hold my liquor well. But yet, God says that a godly person does not cloud their senses with alcohol. In fact, the Apostle Paul had to convince Timothy to put alcohol in the city water of Ephesus because Timothy was so sick from the microbes there. He says, drink, put some alcohol in, put some wine in so that you don't constantly have dysentery from the water of Ephesus. Remember, drink a little. That's the verse every alcoholic knows. When I used to speak at the rescue missions, they all knew, drink a little wine for your stomach's sake. And I always would say to them, your name's not Timothy, bub. But they all knew that verse. But Timothy knew the dangers of alcohol. And even though the Bible never says it's wrong to drink alcohol, it always says it's wrong to be affected by alcohol, to drink it straight, to drink it socially, to get drunk. It never says alcohol. Alcohol is neutral. There's nothing wrong with alcohol. It's kind of like dandelions. There's nothing wrong with dandelions unless you smoke them and get high on them. Then they're bad. But there's nothing wrong with alcohol unless you drink it socially. The book of Proverbs says you may not drink socially. The book of Proverbs also says no one in leadership should drink. The book of Proverbs also says that you're not supposed to get drunk, and the New Testament confirms that. In fact, elders are not supposed to stand near wine. And deacons are not to have enough wine that influences them and affects their behavior. And everyone is not supposed to be socially involved with the whole drinking scene. But some people are. I was just sharing with someone, talking to them. They asked about a Christian leader that's one of the best-selling authors of 20 years ago and 10 years ago. And that person couldn't break the bar scene in their life. They write books that sell 10 million copies, and they can't stop going to bars. That's a Canaanite. And it's brought their destruction. It destroyed their marriage, and it's destroying their life because it's a Canaanite, and they don't get rid of that. Other things that I wrote down. How about the crippling effects of rock music in your spiritual life? You say, rock music? Yeah. Have you ever thought about how quickly those words get into the mouths or into the minds of people? I mean, I stand checking out the grocery stores, and if there's any music playing in the store, usually the cashier's scanning that stuff across, and they're missing every other one, and they're just into that music. And those words, and when people get saved, one of the hardest things they have is cleaning that stuff out of their mind. Especially when they start realizing what it is they've been thinking all those years. Most of those songs are very vile. Innuendos and wickedness. And those are Canaanites. And in Israel, they would not drive them out of the fortified cities. And when we come to Christ, a lot of times we say, I'll get rid of the easy stuff, but I can't give up, the music, pornography, the drinking, whatever. Those cannot be tolerated.